I am the Philosophical Bachelor, and today I'm going to talk about how did consciousness and conscience develop, according to The Phenomenon of Life by Hans Jonas. Quite a few of the earlier thinkers I have covered in previous videos were determinists, such as Spinoza, Thomas Hobbes, and Arthur Schopenhauer. The main rationale they follow is that if human beings were just a part of nature, and all of nature had to obey the law of causality, where for every effect there is a cause, then every detail of human lives must be likewise determined. The opposing side, who are the proponents of free will, date back to antiquity, with Epicurus postulating that atoms can swerve, introducing an element of randomness. Randomness by itself is not sufficient to produce libertarian free will, though it poses a challenge to determinism. However, we should note that if all events happen randomly, that is the opposite of free will. Proponents of free will need unpredictability in human choice that may appear random from the outside, but is a deliberate choice made from the inside or in the mind of the subject. Other religious-minded thinkers simply accept that God has given man free will from revealed truths. Others remain as determinists but argue that while human beings do not possess libertarian free will, they have compatibilist free will, where nothing opposes the decisions we make, though we could not have chosen otherwise. If one did not subscribe to religious revelation, wishful or speculative thinking, determinism poses what may be the strongest argument on the subject of free will, that we essentially do not have it even if we accept the compatibilist position that we may seem to have it. In the 19th and 20th century, however, two major landmark discoveries in science give us fresh possibilities that we indeed may have free will. The first is Charles Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection. He published On the Origin of Species in 1859, just 1 year before Schopenhauer's death in 1860. Hence, Schopenhauer will not have had the chance to consider it. The second is quantum mechanics, where Werner Heisenberg proposed his uncertainty principle in 1927. I have made a video on Robert Kane, who is still alive, and had the chance to profit from quantum uncertainty in arguing for libertarian free will. Today I want to discuss how Hans Jonas draws on evolution to explain the ascending journey from simple to complex life forms, where the movement from immobile plants to mobile animals gave rise to a perception of what is present to their senses, which in human beings were further developed into imagined ideas of what may be absent. With choice comes the ability to select and hence create values and emotions in animals. The next step is when perception directed towards the external world turns inwards, made possible by human ability to imagine through ideas of what it does not literally see, giving rise to the ability to self-reflect. Coupled with emotions and values, human consciousness then develop a conscience, presenting a need for ethics to guide our lives. Jonas's thesis in The Phenomenon of Life, published in 1966, is that a philosophy of life is comprised of a philosophy of the organism and a philosophy of mind, because the organic, even in its lowest forms, prefigures mind, and that mind, even on its highest reaches, remains part of the organic. According to him, the simplest living creature already has the beginning of mind or consciousness, while the most complex living thing, despite its consciousness, is still part of organic matter. The basic idea of his thesis harks back to antiquity when people tried to understand life. Aristotle proposed that all living things have souls. Plants have a vegetative soul, while animals have, in addition to the vegetative, an appetitive soul. Human beings, in addition to both vegetative and appetitive aspects, also have a rational soul, presenting an ascending scale of living things where there is a dependence of each higher strata on the lower, the retention of all the lower in the higher. As living things ascend the scale of life, they are endowed with increasing perception and freedom of action, though plants which are immobile also have freedom. Jonas writes, "Even metabolism, the basic level of all organic existence, exhibits freedom, that it is itself the first form of freedom." Jonas is not trying to come up with an origin story for life, but is contemplating what existence is. Existence does not comprise only of living things, but of both non-living or inorganic things, as well as living or organic things. He suggests that even in the movement from the inorganic to organic life, the organization of matter already seems to have a tendency towards creating freedom as it ascends the scale of existence. However, freedom comes at a price, since the privilege of freedom carries the burden of need and means precarious being, according to Jonas. Reflecting on this, a being with more freedom has more choices, but that implies the risk of making the wrong choices or choosing what it is unable to achieve, compared with a being that has no freedom or little freedom, such as a plant. Then it just has to accept whatever soil it is planted in and whatever sun and rain that comes to it. By having no possibility of freedom means it cannot choose wrongly. Existence comprises living and non-living things, but we should not forget the possibility of non-existence. Living things, merely by separating itself from the world of things, introduces a tension between existence and non-existence. Organic beings remain part of the world, but with the emergence of life comes the threat of non-being or death. Hence, life is concerned to affirm its own existence and needs to do so continuously, since the threat of non-being is ever present and will inevitably engulf being in the end. From the start, by the sheer existence of anything at all, opposition and polarity comes into the world, in this case a polarity of non-existence. There is the polarity of being and non-being, of self and world, of form and matter, of freedom and necessity, writes Jonas. With life come these relations. From those beings capable of conceiving such relations, there arise also the possibility of transcending them. Hence, if such transcendence can be demonstrated to exist even for the most basic living things, then Jonas would have proven his thesis that even the lowest life forms have mind. Part of the nature of life is mortality or death. Living beings rely on conditions that are not within its control, the world providing it the means to sustain itself. It is independent of the world, but yet depends on it. It is free, but this freedom is constrained by necessity. It leads a precarious existence, haunted by a fear of death. The emergence of life from inanimate matter is a bold move of nature, but comes with the price of dread of death. As life ascends through more complex organization of matter towards higher life forms, this price increases, provoking in them the question of the meaning of their existence. This questioning finally is given voice by human beings, after aeons of mute insistence by lower beings incapable of expressing themselves. To discuss the evolution of organic species, Jonas, like Aristotle, begins with plant life. In antiquity, microbes have not yet been discovered, so it is understandable why Aristotle begins with plants, but for Jonas it is rather puzzling. However, microorganisms do not quite fit with the plot of Jonas's account, as we shall see. Plants metabolize in organic matter in its immediate environment into organic matter to sustain its existence. Animal interaction with its environment is less immediate than plants, given its ability to move. Jonas explains that animal existence and interaction with its environment is mediated through three aspects: motility, perception, and emotion. Motility means the ability to move. By having a greater distance from its target object, animals have world compared to plants which have environment. In a world, animal subjects are confronted with discrete, self-contained objects, whereas for plants, its environment consists of adjacent matter and impinging forces. For nutrition, plants metabolize the inorganic matter that is right next to it and are subject to the external forces of its environment such as wind, rain, and sun. They have no choice in the matter, while animals have to perceive, desire, reach, and then act on external objects in space before they can digest them internally in their metabolic systems. Because of this freedom, where its actions are distinct from its objective, there is a risk of failure and error. Jonas calls these possibilities of correct-incorrect or success-failure the very dialectic of life. From these arise pleasure and pain corresponding to the successes and failures which create the tension and excitement of action itself for the animal. These pleasurable or painful feelings cause values to develop in animal, positive values toward what it desires and negative values towards what repels them. However, these feelings still come from achieving or failing to achieve their ends. The next step in the ascending order of life is when the perception of pleasure is disconnected from ends, but seeks pleasure as an experience for its own sake, such as in play. Among the senses, the sense of sight is a major contributor to this immediacy from the objects of desire. An animal's vision of the surroundings contains its object of desire, but also other objects. The animal's emotion towards the various objects give it choice, after which it moves to try to obtain its choice. The arc of its vision represents the range of its freedom and risk. In higher animals, such as human beings, sight adds an even greater degree of separation, of immediacy to reality itself. While people directly perceive objects, they have also the ability to imagine objects when they are not present. These idols or ideas can then be mentally manipulated to provide a symbolic experience even when the objects are absent. A person's earlier experiences of an object contributes to her perception of the object in the present moment, giving the prior experiences a symbolic charge which modifies her current experience of the object. For instance, if she was earlier burned by fire, she may come to associate the sight of fire with pain. The pain is not in the fire itself. It is not objective, since for others, fire may indicate comfort from its warmth or as light to guide them. Our current experiences are colored by our previous experiences, making them subjective. When things are experienced immediately, directly through our sense apparatus, there is no question of truth or falsehood. Truth or falsehood only arises when objects are mediated through our minds. This is the third degree of mediation, the first being immediate like plants with its soil, the second being perception of objects in the distance, the third being an image of absent objects. The fourth degree of mediation is when human beings turn their perception inwards on themselves. When we look outwards, we objectify the objects that we perceive. When we as subjects turn our perceptive gaze inwards, we then view ourselves also as objects. This self-objectification is indirect since it is not using the sense of sight, but is a mental examination of the idols of oneself. Influenced by our communication with other people, we form an image of a model of what a person should be. We may abide by this model, remaking ourselves according to this image, or we may rebel against it. In rare cases, we may assert ourselves to such an extent that we impose our image on society, and in that way remake the model of human beings after ourselves. Because we are able to reflect on ourselves, we can, in addition to the range of feelings of animals, have a dimension of feelings when we measure ourselves against the image we have of ourselves. This image is informed by our perception of other people's perception of us, but also our view of ourselves in terms of our wishes, aspirations, and approvals, which opens us up to despair when we fail to meet up to our own and other people's expectations. It is in the gulf opened by this confrontation of oneself with oneself, and in the exercise of the relation, which in some way or other always has to span the gulf, that the highest elations and deepest dejections of human experience have their place, writes Jonas. We perceive ourselves and compare that perception with what we believe we ought to be. We try to reconcile the two. If we match up to our own expectations, we may feel pleased, but if we do not and are unable to, we may feel disappointment or shame. According to Jonas, we continue to synthesize and integrate the data from our senses as well as our self-reflections into a total image, making sense of who we are and questioning who we want to be. This self-questioning then paves the way for us to develop religion, ethics, and metaphysics to try to answer these questions. We become more than our biological functions, going beyond biological evolution to a history of human beings and beyond the science of biology to a philosophy of man. As living beings advance up the evolutionary ladder, they develop greater degrees of consciousness, finally leading to human beings who are able to self-reflect. Such self-reflection paves the way to a development of conscience, leading to a need for ethics. Through the continuity of mind with organism and of organism with nature, ethics becomes part of the philosophy of nature, writes Jonas. Human beings have a high enough degree of consciousness to realize that they require an ethics because they have an obligation towards one another but also towards all things. Jonas contends that ethics is not merely a human invention but a discovery as beings develop to become more complex. Because human action has an impact on all things, we then have a responsibility towards all things. Jonas speculates that this obligation may be what grounds our responsibility, making us not the lord of all, but the executor of a trust which only he can see but did not create. Ontology as the ground of ethics was the original tenet of philosophy, observes Jonas. What a thing is determines how it can act. Nature has developed from simpler life forms such as plants to animals, culminating in human beings. The existence of human beings is a concern of universal substance, because substance finds its highest development in human beings, endowing us with a consciousness advanced enough to have a conscience. While an individual human being's existence, or even all of mankind's, may seem insignificant on a cosmic scale, the height of development of our conscious inner life makes us an event of cosmic significance, more than a human event. It may be an event for being itself and affect its metaphysical condition, a coming to itself of original substance, writes Jonas. As the culmination of evolutionary development, substance, being, has progressed to produce human life whose consciousness is capable of self-reflection and conscience, of realizing it has an ethical responsibility, and with sufficient intellectual prowess to be able to contemplate and question the meaning of existence. Hence, to achieve true significance in the scheme of things, our ethics cannot be grounded just in ourselves or be concerned with humankind alone, but with all of reality as a foundation. Our ethical responsibility is not just towards ourselves or even just the community of men, but to all of nature. While human beings may be the highest level of development of beings and mind, we remain part of the organic. By first developing an ontology which then gives rise to an ethics, Jonas is following in the footsteps of great thinkers, from ancient Greeks such as Plato and Aristotle to modern thinkers like Spinoza and Schopenhauer. Specifically on Schopenhauer was aware of the early theories of evolution by his contemporaries such as Jean-Baptiste Lamarck, which he criticized in his book On the Will in Nature. Lamarck's theory was that an animal could develop a characteristic as a response to its environment, which then is inherited in its offspring. Examples that Schopenhauer picks on include giraffes, which develop their long necks in order to be able to eat the leaves of the crowns of tall trees in the savannah. He asks us how the others of the species managed to survive in the meantime before developing their long necks. Lamarck's theory paved the way, however, for later geneticists such as Darwin. For Darwin, genetic adaptations are random, giving those of the species who have a random but beneficial adaptation an advantage in survival and hence a better chance to reproduce, passing down that genetic adaptation to their offspring. I do wonder if Schopenhauer had been able to benefit from Darwin's theory. Would his theory of the world as will and representation be even more coherent, since he denies libertarian free will, but yet recommends that human beings deny their otherwise determined will in order to find redemption from the endless striving of the will? Jonas's theory charts a macroevolutionary path which proposes how the more advanced developments of consciousness, exemplified by human beings, give rise to values and conscience, which, while not free will itself, are important precursors for it. While we are not all the way home yet towards definitively proving the existence of libertarian free will, a process philosophy as demonstrated by Jonas is a paradigm shift from the long tradition of fixed essences, which traces back to Platonic ideas, which is where Schopenhauer drew his notion of the immutable will. The evolutionary process shows that essences can indeed change within a species, albeit slowly over many generations. What remains to be shown is that each of us as individuals, in our lifetimes, are not merely beings with determined essences or character as Schopenhauer proposes, but are works in progress in becoming who we will be. If we consider nature has produced first non-living things, out of which simple life forms emerge, after which the process of evolution caused increasingly complex beings, first plants, then animals which develop motility, perception and emotion, allowing it to value things, culminating in human beings whose consciousness developed to produce conscience, is it legitimate or a step too far to propose that free will evolved out of conscience and the ability to value things? The movement from non-existence to existence is a big leap for nature, one which we have yet to be able to reproduce in a laboratory. Then from non-sentient organic life to conscious beings is another major leap. If we can accept that natural evolution can explain these leaps, then we may ask if evolution can also explain one more big leap, from conscious beings to beings with free will. Thank you for listening to the Philosophical Bachelor.